Hello, hello, hello! It's Juliana Michaels and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm sharing 6 ways to use alcohol inks combined with alcohol pearls, alloy alcohol inks, texture paste, embossing powder, and alcohol lift ink. Each technique is a way to take a simple alcohol ink background to the next level. As always, I encourage you to shop your stash and see if you already have something similar that you can use. However, if you're interested in any of the products I'm using, you can find the supply list with links in the description box below. When you shop through those links, you're supporting me at no extra cost to you, and I really appreciate that so very much. So the stamps and stencils I'm going to be using are a combination of older and newer stamps and stencils from Tim Holtz and Stampers Anonymous. And while these have always been available from Stampers Anonymous because they never retire anything, you can buy all of Tim's stamps and stencils from the very beginning on their website. They have kind of re-released them in a sense, just to kind of bring them back to the forefront and remind people that these amazing stamp designs are still available and out there. And these stamps and stencils will also be available in other stores as well. So make sure to check the links in my description box below. Of course, if you don't have these exact stencils and stamps, you can still apply the techniques that I'm using with your own stash of stencils and stamps. So don't feel like you need to go out and get these by any means. Stamp sets I'm going to be using are Papillon CMS 106, French Marketplace, the CMS 071, and Artful Flight CMS 069. And you'll notice these older stamp sets came on these white cards and the art is printed on the card. And then, but with the stamp, the art, like what we're used to with the newer rubber stamps from Tim Holtz, the art isn't printed on the stamp. So just a little something to note there. But obviously they're still made out of the same amazing red rubber that Stampers Anonymous has always been known for. The stencil set I'm going to be working with is Mini Set 25. And it's got this really pretty rose, kind of a filigree type stencil, and then another floral stencil. And I'm also going to be working with this mixed media stamp stencil set that is mixed media 15. And it contains this stamp set and a stencil. And so the stamps that are in this are a kind of a combination of different stamps from a variety of stamp sets that have been resized. So if you have any of these stamps, they look familiar to you. These specific stamps are going to be slightly smaller or larger than the original stamp set. And then of course these, instead of being made out of red rubber, are made out of photopolymer, but they're still amazing, great quality. And then of course we've got the stencil. And as you can see here, this is a combination of 2 stencil designs. And this is a look at the 2 original full-size stencils that are kind of combined onto this one stencil. And the art is exactly the same size when you line it up, so it's exactly the same art. It's just half of the stencil design at the top and then another stencil design on the lower half. And it just gives you a little bit more flexibility if you don't already have these stencils. I feel like this is just a great choice. It's also a great way to get into doing some stamping and stenciling if you're kind of new to all of this. So as far as storage goes, I've just been storing these in the plastic sleeve that they come in. I've just used my scissors to trim off that hang tab. And yeah, so that's kind of what I'm doing with those. So, and just real quick, the 2 stencils that these are based off of are 19 and 32. And for the mediums, I'm going to be working with a wide variety of things here, as you can see. So the main focus here, though, is going to be the alcohol inks. And I've got alcohol ink in Sunshine Yellow, Aqua, and Cosmopolitan. And then I've got alcohol pearls in Tranquil, Enchanted, and Alchemy. I've also got the alloy in Gilded. I've got some texture paste opaque, super fine gold embossing powder. I've got alcohol lift ink, I've got a embossing ink pad, and then I'm also going to be working with some isopropyl rubbing alcohol. You need 91% when you're working with alcohol inks. And then I also have some alcohol blending solution, which you need if you're going to work with alcohol pearls or the alloys. The alcohol pearls and the alloys will not, the mica that's in these that makes them shimmery and shiny will not work with the rubbing alcohol. The pigments won't move, and even worse, the powder will just like rub off on your finger. So you definitely want both if you're going to use both. And then I also have some just real fine tip nozzle bottles here that I have the rubbing alcohol in and the blending solution in. And that just helps it make it a little easier to control the application. For the most part, I'm going to be working with craft plastic, so like Yupo paper would work. You could also use the scrapbook.com glossy cardstock if you like. And then you also need just one piece of just some plain white cardstock as well. And before I get started, I also want to make sure that I shake up and mix well for the alloys and the alcohol pearls. They all have kind of that mica that will settle on the bottom, and there's a little shaker ball in there. And you just want to shake this up until you get all of that mixed in and it's no longer sitting on the bottom of the bottle. So there you can see that that is all mixed in and ready to go. The other tools that you're going to need for this is some sort of glass mat or glass surface of some sort. The alcohol inks will stain any other material that they come in contact with, so I highly recommend working on some kind of glass surface. And then of course you're going to need something to blow the alcohol inks around. This is just a little air blower tool. You can also use like a low wattage hair dryer. I actually tried one this weekend and it is not for me. I feel like I had a lot more control with this little air blower than I do with the constant air that's blowing from blow dryer type thing. So that was just my experience and thoughts on that. So first off, we're going to start off with our alcohol ink paper, and the color here I've got is Cosmopolitan, and because I'm just working with alcohol inks, I am going to work with the isopropyl alcohol here. So I'm just applying a good amount of the alcohol. Usually you want more alcohol than you have of the alcohol ink so that you can really get that to mix and blend. And then I'm just using that blower tool and squeezing it gently to mix the alcohol in with the alcohol ink and get that ink to blend and move across the paper. So you're not trying to give it like CPR when you're squeezing. You just want to gently squeeze and just keep blowing until it kind of quits moving, and then you know you've got all you're going to get from it. Now, if you want more color, you feel free to add some more color in areas that maybe don't have any, especially like that area still has some of the rubbing alcohol in it. And I'm just going to, add a little color there and then just keep blending that through. So I know a lot of times there's like, oh, use these combinations of alcohol inks together, and that is super fine and dandy, and actually you could mix all the colors that I'm going to be working with today together. But I also wanted to show you the variations in color that you're going to get just using one alcohol ink. There are multiple pigments in each of these to create the color that it is, and once you start applying the rubbing alcohol or the alcohol blending solution, you're going to get that pigment to move and create a variety of colors just with that one color there. So we're going to set this to the side and let that dry. And then when it comes to cleanup, I like to use a little bit of rubbing alcohol. I do like to clean off the nozzles of my rubbing alcohol. That one had gotten kind of dirty. In fact, I think I had the wrong lid on it because look what just wiped off everywhere. So I'm going to probably clean that lid out with some rubbing alcohol as well. So I'm not going to make you watch that, but I'll just kind of clean that off by sticking a little paper towel down in there and rubbing it around and cleaning that out again before I put it back on this bottle. And then as far as the glass mat, you can just add some of the rubbing alcohol to that And we'll wipe that up nice and easily, and you're ready to go on to the next color. Now for this next step, you're going to take one of your stencils, doesn't matter which one, and you're just going to lay it over the paper. As you can see here, I'm kind of laying it over the area where there's more of the alcohol ink color. And I'm going to take the alcohol lift ink and a small little blending dome foam here. And I'm just going to apply some of that ink, kind of dab this into that ink. And then I'm going to dab this through the stencil to apply that ink. And just kind of repeat that dabbing process over the background. There's really no point in putting the ink where there's no alcohol ink because there's nothing to remove there. But as you will see, this ink is super magical and really cool effects that you can get using it. So then once you have a good application of that, you can just gently peel off your stencil. And then you're going to need a clean cloth or a clean paper towel. And then I like to just kind of dab it over the area where I had applied the alcohol lift ink. And you'll start seeing some of that ink lifting up. And you can see it here on the paper towel. And you just kind of keep dabbing over it. And I can already tell I probably need a little bit more of the alcohol lift ink because I'm not quite getting the full design from the stencil. So I'm going to reline up my stencil with the area where it was placed before, and then I'm just going to apply some more ink here. So I'm going to ink up again and then just repeat that dabbing through the stencil here. And again, just gently lift that off and go back to the paper towel, lay that over, kind of dab it off. And I like to kind of dab it off before I start the next step, which is you're supposed to kind of like buff this a little bit. But I find that when I do that, before the ink is kind of, I don't know, like dry almost, that it seems to smear that ink. So this has just been my preference, is to do it this way. And then I can go back in and kind of buff over that area. And then you can see how the ink's rubbing off and then revealing more of that design. Now, if you do have some areas where the alcohol ink's gotten kind of thick and it's maybe just a little bit sticky or tacky, I also found that if you lightly mist your paper towel with some water, very lightly mist, like one spritz, and then rub it over the sticky areas, the paper towel won't stick to that area, and it just makes it a little bit easier to remove and lift off that ink. That was actually a kind of happy accident that I discovered when I was working on these backgrounds. I had, for some reason, dampened up the paper towel that I was working with and rubbed it over my paper, and I was pleasantly surprised at what happened there. So there is a look at that background. Now you can see I maybe didn't get it lined up quite as good there, or maybe I had more, like too much ink and it didn't get quite down in, too much ink and it went underneath the stencil. You know, if your ink pad's really juicy, you might want to just tap off some of that excess ink onto your craft mat before you pounce the blending tool onto your paper. But I'm going to see if I can get a little more definition out of the centers of these flowers. So I'm going to go back in here and pounce that again. Just there in the centers, and let's see if we can get a little bit better lift. There we go. Slightly better. All right, so, but there is a look at the alcohol lift ink through a stencil. And then as far as when you're finished with the stencil here, you can just clean that with some soap and water to remove that ink. All right, so next up, I'm going to work with the alcohol ink and alcohol pearl together. And again, you just want to make sure that you shake this up really well, get all that mica mixed in. And then because I'm working with the alcohol pearl, I want to use the alcohol blending solution. Again, just kind of a reminder, the alcohol pearls don't tend to want to move and flow when you use just rubbing alcohol, and they don't dry. Like the mica will wipe off and you'll get shiny stuff all over your hands if you don't use the alcohol blending solution. It's like you need that to make it set and be permanent. So I'm just gonna add a little bit alcohol pearl here, and then now we're gonna add a little bit of the blending solution. And again, you want to be generous with your application of the blending solution so that you've got enough on there to help those colors mix and move around on the paper. And if you want a little more color, just add that in. I just make sure when you're dropping that on there, I find that if I drop it down onto where there's still the blending solution or the isopropyl alcohol, depending on what you're using, that it will, you know, kind of helps it keep flowing and moving, and I don't know, it just gives you a nicer, smoother ink flow, I feel like. Here, just still adding a little bit more of the alcohol ink. I just want a little more color here and there. And then just blowing, gently squeezing with the air blower here to get that ink moving and flowing. Again, I wouldn't mind a little more color through here. And then, as you can see, I'm kind of like doing a pattern that's like not really covering the whole background. So if you want to, you know, have a kind of more full coverage and not any of this white space on your backgrounds, definitely go ahead and, you know, add more ink and blend that ink across your backgrounds there. And then here, as you can see, just get a little bit of shimmer and shine from that alcohol pearl. And again, just going to let that sit, let that dry. This was two colors, both pinks, and again, you can kind of see that nice, but it looks like you used more than one color, but you really just used two different colors, and you're still getting a nice blend of colors that's very eye-pleasing. And then this is the one that we just did, that's the alcohol ink only. And again, so you can see that pearl really just complements that alcohol ink here very nicely. So now we're going to take that alcohol ink and alcohol pearl background. I will tell you right now, this is a different background than the one I just showed you during the making because I messed up and had to start over. But use the same inks and colors. And now I've got my background stamp here, and I've just positioned it in on my stamping platform and kind of centered it so that it would be in the center of this paper. And I'm using just a low-tack double-sided adhesive to kind of help hold my paper in place. And the alcohol ink and everything is all completely dry. You do want to make sure that that is nice and dry before you go on to this next step. And now we're going to take that alcohol lift ink and we're going to apply it to the stamp. Before you do this, you do want to make sure that your stamp is really nice and clean. If you've been using your rubber stamps with archival inks, you do want to clean them really well, clean it off, and then make sure, like stamp it onto some scrap paper, and then make sure you're not getting any more ink transfer. Otherwise, that ink will transfer onto the alcohol lift ink pad and also onto your background, which is not what we're going for here. So I'm just going to stamp that down. Rub over that, lift up, And then I am going to take a scrap of paper just to kind of stamp off any more on there that might be there. But I'm not moving the paper from below. And I'm going to re-ink that just to get a really good coverage. There we go. And now we're going to take a piece of just smooth white cardstock and place that into your stamping platform in the same position as you had your other paper. And then you're going to just press down and stamp that image. And you're just going to get just another like 2-for-1 background kind of thing. The biggest thing when you're doing this, especially if you're working with like a lighter ink color, is you do want to probably do a couple applications of the lift ink to the stamp when it's on the alcohol ink background, so that you're getting enough of that lift and color off of there onto the stamp so that you get a nice image here. So if you don't have enough ink on here and lifted off of here, then you're not going to have a lot to transfer over onto this other paper. So if that happens, you know, you can always make another alcohol ink background. This one's not going to go to waste, and all you've wasted really is that ability to do that transfer part. So now we're going to move on to the next technique. So for this technique, I'm going to use the alcohol ink in Sunshine Yellow and alcohol pearls in Alchemy. And then I've got my blending solution, because again, you want to use the blending solution if you're going to use the pearls. If you're not going to use the pearl, then you can just use regular rubbing alcohol, 91%. And again, just make sure that you're that you've shaken this up really well, the pearls, shake it up really well, and have it mixed in real well. All right, so now I'm going to apply some of the alcohol ink, just kind of here and there. And I'll add some of the alcohol pearls, and I kind of like to put the pearls in with the alcohol ink. I don't know, I just feel like it helps it blend a little better, and add a little bit more of that in there if I need to. Now I'm going to add the blending solution, and then just get those colors flowing and moving. And grab the blower tool and just gently squeezing, get those colors going. And then like here, like if some of the alcohol ink gets onto your glass mat, you can just go off the edge here and blow from this direction and move it back onto the paper. Like I'm getting all that up here in this corner, just blowing that back up on the paper there. And then again, if you want more color, you can always go in and add some more if you know, want it a little bit more intense in some areas. And then from here, just pick that up and set that to the side and then let that dry. So now for this next technique, we're going to take that alcohol ink, alcohol pearl background and one of the stencils here. And again, just going to place that over my background. And now I'm going to take some texture paste opaque. Got a little rubber band I've been putting around the edge here instead of using the saran wrap and stuff, and that's supposed to help keep it from drying out. And I've just started doing it, so I don't really know how well it works, but I'm going to be giving it a try here. So I'm just going to scoop up some of the texture paste opaque onto the back side of my palette knife, and then I'm just going to apply that to the background here. And I'm not going for perfect coverage. Just want to kind of get a little bit of a design across the background and add just a little bit of interest to the design and background here, and a little bit of texture as well. And then once you're finished with that, then you can lift it up and kind of reveal what you have there. If you want more of a design, then go ahead and apply more paste. But for now, I'm just going to set this to the side and let it dry, and then I will go and clean off my stencil. All right, so for this one, we're going to work with the alcohol pearl and the regular alcohol ink, and this is Aqua and Tranquil. And then I'm also going to work with the alloy Gilded. So again, you want to make sure you've gotten the alloy and the alcohol pearls. Make sure that you shake them up really well before you start working with them. And then because we're working with the pearl and the alloy, we want to make sure we're working with the alcohol blending solution so that those inks adhere to the paper and nothing will rub off. So we're going to just add a little bit of our alcohol ink, and then I'm going to add some of the alcohol pearl. And then I'm going to add my blending solution and get those flowing before I add the Gilded alloy there. So get a little more. More of this is always better. This kind of helps get those colors flowing. I'm going to add some more of the regular alcohol ink and kind of trying to put it into areas where there's ink already there. And kind of sometimes just putting it in the center of the pearl can kind of help break it up a little bit. You can also put the blending solution there if you want. If you are wanting more color though, then add a little more of the alcohol ink. And in areas like that, you can always kind of take your finger and dab it into some of the alcohol or blending solution and blend it around there a little bit. And I'm going to add some of that alloy. And don't really need a whole lot of that. Just a little, kind of go a long way. And then I'm going to add a little bit more of the blending solution. Get that moving and flowing. And then as you can see, it kind of starts moving that color out of the way. So I'm going to go back in here and add some more alcohol ink kind of to the center of that to break it up a little bit. And just kind of keep kind of playing back and forth with adding those different inks and the blending solution if need be. You can add that like on that edge there and then just kind of get that moving and flowing. I feel like there's a lot of gold right there, so I'm going to add some more alcohol ink. Same down here in this corner. And I kind of wouldn't mind having a little bit of this alloy here. So I'm going to add some there, a little more color. And if you want to add a little bit more of the pearl here, you can. And then just kind of get those colors moving and flowing. And then always when you're, using the air blower, it's just gentle puffs. I'm not going, Heimlich maneuver on them. So again, if you want to break up, add more color, add it in, and then just gentle puffs. And then you'll get, you start kind of getting some of those cells forming, especially now, like this is starting to get pretty dry and there's not a lot of the alcohol inks and the blending solution are all pretty dry. So you're going to start getting more like these kind of defined areas instead of it being so smooth and flowy. And sometimes I kind of like that look. I feel like it's just adds a little more texture and interest to the background. And then from here, of course you can keep adding and going, but at some point you just got to pick a stopping point. But there is a look at that background using the alcohol pearls, alcohol inks, and the alloy mixed together. And just set that to the side and let it dry. And then once this background's dry, if you want to do any of the other techniques with the alcohol lift ink through the stencil, or the stamping with the alcohol lift ink, or using the paste through the stencil onto it, certainly feel free to do that as well. Or you can just leave it like this and use it for your background. So now I'm going to take another alcohol ink background. This is one I've made just separately off camera that has a combination of the alcohol ink aqua and the alcohol pearl tranquil and the blending solution, and it's dry. And now we're going to do some stamping and heat embossing on the alcohol ink paper. So a couple things of note here. So I'm going to be using super fine gold embossing powder and embossing ink pad. And you know, we're working on a plastic paper. So you do want to be cautious when you're heating any kind of a glossy or coated paper or a plastic paper, because when you're doing the heat for the heat embossing, that temperature gets really hot and it will melt and warp the paper. So I've got a couple of tricks to share that might help with that. And then I also recommend that you do use some sort of tweezers or something to hold the paper when you're doing the heat embossing, just to protect your fingers, because the paper does get pretty hot if you're using the craft plastic. And then when it comes to actually stamping and heat embossing, I do highly recommend trying several different types of embossing powders as well as different stamps. So as you can see here, these are just some scrap papers, but here this is kind of a chunkier gold glitter that I used. And then this is just more of a standard gold embossing powder, and then this is a more of a super fine gold embossing powder. But you can see, just like with these butterflies, depending on the image, the powder will just melt if the image is so small and so detailed that you're going to lose all of that interest that you would get versus if you just stamped this with regular ink. So just something to keep in mind. You might want to do a little bit of a practice stamp on some scrap paper to make sure that it's really going to show up when you heat emboss it. So I've got a couple of different stamps here that I'm going to be working with. I've got this butterfly from that mixed media stamp set, and I'm going to stamp that here in the center of my background. I kind of just play around with getting that centered, and then use, make sure you use your magnets to help hold that paper in place. And as you can see, that stamp will stick really well to that paper. And then now I'm just going to apply the embossing ink to the stamp. And then stamp that over onto my background. And just lift that up gently. And then if you kind of look at a little bit of an angle, you will be able to see the stamped image and kind of just make sure that it looks like you got everything stamped. And then you can remove that and set this to the side here. And then I just like to use a piece of printer paper, fold it in half, and I'm going to pour my embossing powder over my stamped image. And one thing you want to make sure when you are doing this step is that that your alcohol ink paper is dry, completely dry, because you are going to get some of it sticking here and there, and I recommend using some kind of a small brush to wipe that off. So then you can just take a small brush and wipe that off. And if you've got a lot of static going on, another option you could do, if you like to use like a anti-static pouch or anti-static tool and then wipe that over the surface. You can also take just a corner of a paper towel, kind of use that to wipe off some of that excess powder as well. Or you can just leave it and let it be part of your grungy style if you like. So I'm going to do that, and then you can tap off some of that excess, and I'm just going to get a little bit more, another little wipe here. And then going to heat this now with my heat tool. I'll put the powder back into the jar there, and then kind of set that to the side. And then before you heat emboss, like I said, you want to make sure you have something to hold the paper with so you don't burn your hand. And you also want to make sure that before you turn your heat embossing gun on that you let it warm up really well. So, 20-25 seconds or so. So then once your heat gun's warmed up, then you can just start applying the heat. You want to make sure you keep it very far away from your paper, and you also want to make sure that you keep it moving and aren't holding it in one place for too long. You can see that paper kind of warped just a tiny little bit there, and then what I like to do while it's still kind of warm is lay it down onto my craft mat and then just tap it down, and just gently, and then it will kind of cool back down and be flat. Now that only works if you are not overheated it. If you've overheated it and it is all like wavy and bendy, then you've overheated it, and there's probably no salvaging it at that point. So, but yeah, so as you can see, I have a heat embossed craft plastic paper, and it's fine. So just you have to go slow, keep that heat tool moving, and then kind of lay it down. Give it just a second to cool so that you don't smudge the embossing, and then it will flatten back down. So now we're going to do another bit of stamping here. So now I'm going to do some of that stamping with that script stamp. And my magnets help hold that paper in place. And then again, I just kind of like to use the grid on here to kind of make sure that my stamp is straight as I can get it anyway. And now I'm just going to apply a little bit of an anti-static pouch to the background here, just to kind of show you a little how that can kind of help minimize the powder from sticking where you don't want it. So I'm going to apply some of that embossing ink to my stamp. And I don't necessarily want more stamping here, so I'm actually going to take a cloth here, just slightly damp, and I'm just going to kind of remove a little bit of that ink there and kind of give myself a little bit more of a slightly grungy effect. And lift up, and then you can kind of look and see if you like what you have there. You can kind of at a little bit of an angle, you'll see that shine from the ink. And we're just going to remove that and pour embossing powder on there. And then as you can see, that anti-static pouch really helped. I don't have powder all over the place like I did when I just did the butterfly without it. So I would probably recommend using one for this. So that plastic paper, especially the super fine powder, really wants to just stick to everything. And then we're just going to repeat the heat embossing, turn our heat gun on, let it warm up really well, and then just hold it out nice and slowly, keep it moving to emboss that area. Again, just kind of give it a second to cool, and then just kind of tap it down onto your glass mat, and then that cooling, it'll just cool and kind of flatten out pretty well. So here we are. Now I'm just going to repeat that same process here in this upper corner. Here's a look at each of the backgrounds I created. To embellish most of the cards, I added a simple die cut. On the background with the alcohol lift ink transfer, I added some additional stamping that I heat embossed. I added a heat emboss sentiment to each card and finished them all off by matting the background with a layer of gold cardstock and a layer of white cardstock. I really love how this set of cards came together, and I hope you enjoyed learning these 6 ways to take your alcohol ink to the next level. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you can join me on a more regular basis. Hit the like if you enjoyed this video, and if you want to join me on my other social media platforms, you can find the links to those in the description box below. Also, feel free to leave me a comment if you have any questions or if there's something you'd love to share with me and our community. I'll see you in the comments below and in the next video. Until next time, stay crafty, my friend.